Hello, and welcome to this episode of Such a Nightmare, Conversations About Horror. My name is Katherine Troyer, and I'm so excited to get to talk to Toni Tresca.
Hey there.
This is a podcast where the horrifically nerdy meets the terrifyingly academic, as we explore that fine line between the horrific and the horrible. Each episode looks at a specific horror text that is, for better or worse, giving us nightmares.
And we are so excited to have you join us today for our conversation about 2023's Maeve Fly. And for all of you out there who are cringing at how we've said it, perhaps you say the character's name a different way. Perhaps even CJ Leede, if you're listening, perhaps you say it a different way. If so, feel free to write into the podcast. We'd love to have you on air to set the record straight. But we've decided to say Maeve Fly.
That is the most shameless plug ever. That is such a great way. As we've insulted your work, if you want to come on the episode, we'd be happy to have you join us. I like that.
As you're going to hear, CJ, we quite love your work. This is such a delightful book. So this is a good one to start our conversations back. It's been a little bit since we've gotten to talk on the podcast.
Has been a while, and this was a good one to come back to. You know, that line about, like, for better or worse giving us nightmares. This is a book that's going to linger for quite some time in all the best and most traumatic ways.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. I knew your pitch to me when you kind of were like, we want to do a book. We were talking about which books we wanted to talk about. You said, I really want to talk about this book. I've heard it's kind of like American Psycho, the female version of that, and it was a pretty good pitch in and of itself. And
I was just gonna say there were three things I knew. I knew that she knew Grady Hendrix well enough that he was an early reader. I knew that Stephen Graham Jones had blurbed it, and I knew that at least one description was that it was the female version of American Psycho, a book I still haven't read. Right, you and I have seen the movie. We've talked about the movie, but I would be interested now in going and reading that novel and really seeing whether or not that's a fair assessment to Maeve Fly, or whether that actually like reduces Maeve Fly's power, because it might do that too.
It's interesting. We can talk about this a little bit more explicitly in the influences section when we talk about Leede's kind of recorded influences, because she's actually very referential to the book, and she's very much does model it off of that. And while she acknowledges that she's seen the movie and that is something that she plays with, it is definitely more in the spirit of the book. So I think I am actually much more interested after having read this book in going back to that text, particularly in the light of that content, to know that she thinks so highly of it as she was writing this.
Because I was a little hesitant to pick up the book, because one of the things I like about the film, right, is that it's got a female director, and, you know, much to the chagrin of people who are like, no one could take this super masculine story and tell it except for another man. So I had a sort of natural reaction that was against reading the novel. But you're right, this book has made me want to go read it, which is quite a feat unto itself. But before we get further, will you give us one of your excellent spoiler-less summaries?
Yeah, so Maeve is she's living in LA. She is living with her grandmother, or living is probably the wrong word to describe what her grandmother is doing. She's in a coma. And she is taking care of her in her fancy apartment. Her grandmother was this kind of extravagant actress in LA, pretty famous for a couple of roles, but always kind of on the outside of things. By day, Maeve is working at the happiest place on earth, and for legal reasons, that's all I'll say in terms of the name of where she works. And she plays a certain blonde ice queen, along with her best friend in the park, who is an aspiring actress-to-be. Everything's kind of going pretty good for Maeve. She's loving life. She loves her job. She maybe doesn't love her boss, who can be a bit much and overbearing, but things are going good. And then all of a sudden, her best friend's brother arrives in town and kind of forces perspectives and positions to change, along with some other things that happen throughout the novel. This read makes it sound like
Yes.
it's kind of lighthearted and fun. It's
Yeah,
pretty
it sounds like a
dark.
rom-com that you're
Yeah, I
describing.
know.
Yeah.
Actually, I gave it a really light read. There's also a lot of really gory murder. There's some disturbing scenes with like a pipe
Ooh,
that I will literally never get out of my head. So thank you for
no.
that.
Yeah. And you told me that you were reading that scene while on a plane next to like a
I
baby.
was. So deep in the book,
That's
I'll
awkward.
keep it pretty spoiler free because if you are going to read it, it's an experience you should definitely have yourself. And you will
Yes.
remember. I was reading a scene that happens late in the book. It's a torture scene with a boss, and I was reading it next to a small child on a plane, and it just I felt so dirty and wrong. That scene in and of itself
Yeah.
is incredibly explicit and disgusting and hard to
Yes.
read. And then I was just seeing this child like giggling and laughing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you have so much innocence and joy. Maeve would hate you.
That is so funny. Yeah, that's a very awkward scene to read in anyone's company, let alone a small child's. So I like the fact that you gave this rom-commy feel to it, right? Because in many ways that is the layer that's on top. And I think that that's one of the things I really liked about the writing of this is that I have read a lot of horror where they do such a effective job of making us hate the main characters that I'm like, why am I going to keep reading this book for another couple hundred pages? Because this person is just deplorable. And my experience is like, I'm not having a good time. But I don't know if it's the fact that Maeve really loves her job
hmm
at the happiest place in the world, or if it's the fact that in one respect, not the murdery respect, but in the like Halloween music and Halloween respect, I am probably most people that are reading this book can really relate that this is like our favorite time of the year. One year for Halloween, we threw a party and everyone got a mixed CD with like all of our Halloween jams on it. So like, this is something that I can definitely relate to. But there is I don't want to say purity, that's not the right word, especially considering the things that Maeve does. But there's a joy to her that makes her an enjoyable character to read.
Yeah, I would say that again, like she definitely at least starts the place. She's really stuck, of course. Like she's living like a life on repeat, essentially. She is
Right.
like she starts the book. She's work. I mean, again, I gave it a really glamorous read. I guess I left out some important details of her day-to-day life. She's going to work. She is torturing people via text and
hmm
attempting to like ruin their lives via like outing
hmm
these like Trumpers online and like these people like she other people as well, perhaps like some pedophiles or stuff. She's kind of they mentioned that she
hmm
does this kind of the pattern behavior that she'll just find people online, get really close with them, form an intimate relationship, and
hmm
then use their secrets and like out them on Reddit or something. So she's doing
Right,
that.
right.
She's also getting really drunk at a bar, that's a really strange bar with like someone who
Yes.
is is or is not Johnny Depp. One of
Yes.
my favorite gags in the book, and I couldn't. I'm like I
Yes.
don't understand. I can't even sure. I'm not even sure I quite understood it, but I just love the LA ness of it and the like.
Yes.
Maybe it's a famous person. Maybe it's an imitation. Isn't that the
Like,
point of the
does it
city?
matter? Yeah, so I lived in Riverside, California, which is somewhere between 30 to 90 minutes away from LA, depending on traffic. And I went to school out there for my undergrad and master's. And, I didn't make it to LA as much as I should have, considering how close I was. But at the time, it felt very far away because the traffic was so horrendous. Parking's bad. And LA is so sprawled that like it's not like you can just park and kind of easily take in the city. You really have to know where you want to go. But reading this book made me regret that I didn't take the time to get to know LA a little bit better, that I didn't really sort of like, I never went to the tar pits. I should have. I would have liked that a lot. I never even made it to Universal Studios to
Hmm.
like the rides. And again, it was just because that's what happens when you're in college. It's really hard sometimes to get out of your bubble. And also, all of my friends were instead going to the happiest place in the world. And so I had a membership to there instead. So we did that an awful lot. But it was really interesting reading this love letter to LA
hmm
and all the weirdness of it, right? Like
Yeah.
not once was Lead like, this is a completely normal city. It was like, here's the strip club within the strip club that is within the pirate ship,
Right.
and that was just interesting.
Yeah, and she kind of juxtaposes that because with like her friend's brother, and I should have forgotten her name.
Gideon. Kate and Gideon.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Her friend Kate's brother Gideon comes in, and he's from New York, and so he comes in with a very judgmental eye. So it's really nice to get to see. It's a fun thing that Leede sets up, in which she lets us see the city from these two clashing perspectives, and Kate, who is kind of seeing everything with this really rose-tinted glasses, because she's trying to get a favor of the producers and the directors and the live her dream. She's there's a great line, is everybody has their gods in here and their things they're chasing after and things that they create. It's just about what that is. And hers is definitely Hollywood. She is chasing that specific vision of Hollywood. Kate is. Gideon's at first he's very hesitant to it. He's like, it's all fake. It's all kind of.
Although in his conversation, he does kind of intimate that he's just saying some of that to rile Maeve up, right?
Yeah.
So But you're right. He at least is able to instantly rile her up, because that's such a outsider perspective, right, of LA, that it's like cultureless. And I love that sort of tirade she goes on, where she's like, literally, if there are humans, there's culture, the end.
Yes.
And then she's like, and also, by the way, we like have started Hollywood. So I thought it was just really interesting to see that tension at work, because even though it's clear that Maeve loves LA, the author also did a good job of being sort of agnostic about whether or not anyone's dreams are good or bad, right? I mean, they never really judge Kate for choosing to make the sacrifices that she's doing, but they also acknowledge very much that she is definitely allowing herself to be hurt in pursuit of her dreams. But also, isn't that what it means to have dreams, right? Is to be willing to be hurt. So I just thought it was really sort of sophisticatedly handled, this complication that is LA in this book, which is really, I think, one of Leede's greatest strengths throughout is that these things that I'm not sure how I should feel, Leede made it harder to make that decision.
Yeah, because I really think there's like 4 central characters. We've obviously got Maeve, Kate, Gideon, and then LA itself. I guess you could maybe say like even the happiest place on Earth itself is another sub character, but I think it fits really cleanly within LA as like a larger character. And I guess we don't have to adhere to the same legal principles that the author does on the pod. We're talking about the Mouse House, Disneyland.
We are. Yes.
Itself, and she mentions in an interview or a conversation that she did with Ariana Reach, who is the author of another book also about theme parks that came out. A quick shout out to At the End of Every Day, about that. She did a really fascinating conversation with her in June 28th, 2023 on Crime Reads. We'll throw a link to that in the description of this. It's a really great conversation in general, and she talks about how she went through with her, she sent a version over with all the names in of all the characters originally. So there is a version out there of Maeve Fly that's got all that in there, but so she went through and then obviously talked to some legal folks and changed things to make it more like that. But yeah, she plays Elsa, and her friend Kate plays Anna at this amusement park. And she has she is utterly fascinated by the park and the people who inhabit it. It's like there's like a meta conversation in here happening about nostalgia and Disney adult that's taking place within the context of the park and playing out. And I think nostalgia, not in the way it's come to be associated in like current culture, nostalgia in the wartime sense of the word, that it was originally used, and that it's like a longing for a home that doesn't really even exist anymore, or this fakeness there.
Yeah, so when the coin was termed, right, it was absolutely coined to describe these soldiers who were exhibiting physiological as well as psychological illness, because they didn't have that sense of past and home anymore, right? Because they were no longer at home, no longer felt like they had a home now that they've been out and about. And yeah, I think you're right that this book really asks us to consider, can we have nostalgia for something that's fabricated? But then again, isn't everything fabricated? And actually, I think that it may have been harder for her to not just like say Disneyland every time and to find some obscure way to do it. But I actually think it made for a more powerful read, because we knew exactly who she was talking about, what she was talking about, where she was talking about. And it just further made her point.
Yeah.
Right? That this is a place that has power that is really unlike anything else in the world.
Yeah, there is some. Disney gets a lot of bad press now for a
Sure,
myriad of
sure.
reasons. I mean, its CEO Bobby Boy is a real piece of shit,
Yeah.
and he's like saying some real terrible stuff right now about writers and actors, and
Yes.
getting involved in a lot of really bad stuff. So, but at its core, it really did create a lot of these incredible core memories for so many of us. I mean, like, I'm not going to sit here and try to lie to you and say that I didn't grow up watching like Aladdin or Cinderella
Sure.
or Snow White or stuff like that. Those things
Sure.
definitely were the bedrock of my childhood.
And I did have a pass. I don't think I'd be able to afford a pass anymore. It's so expensive now. But I did have a pass for the few years that I was out there at school. And it's interesting because that's a whole separate culture, right? So there's the people who come for vacations. And then there are these folks that's where they go every weekend. And that's where they go, and there's, and they go and they swing dance, and they go and they, participate in these like cultural moments that are cultures within cultures. And that was really a huge part of what I think Leede was exploring, is this idea of community, but also community that feels that it can be hard to feel like you belong in, right? Because Maeve talks a lot about how lonely she feels and how worried she is that when her grandma dies, when Kate becomes successful, because she believes that she will,
Mm-hmm.
she's very worried that she's going to be isolated, despite the fact that she's probably physically touched more at the park every day in one day than most people probably are touched in like a week, right?
It's true. It's like something incredibly individualistic and isolating about even
Yes.
in that communal space and experience. It's like it's kind of in the background, but there is always that element of like money and the payment into the park and
Yes.
like who gets to come in and whose vision and nostalgia is being supported and upheld here within the park and on Main Street. It's a really nuanced conversation, and it's kind of impressive that this is Leede's her debut book, debut novel.
Yeah.
She's written pieces before, but this is her first kind of full length book that she's gotten to release. And I mean, again, like we read a lot of stuff from like debut authors, and I feel like she's got a real sense of the craft. She's got an MFA in creative writing from Columbia University, which sure definitely helps. And she, in her undergrad, this was probably one of the things, something I found really interesting. She got a BA from NYU in mythology and the Middle Ages, which I think really came
That's
through
cool.
in this book, because I feel Disney and itself is almost treated as this mythological creature and this like myth, this
Yes.
cultural myth within our society that is both upheld, it's true, and it's not true, like all good myths.
Yes. Yeah. And it has become a religion, right? But a man-made religion, as all religions are. Yeah, I think that what I find interesting about the fact that she has an MFA is that, I know a lot of genre writers that either struggled through their MFA program or eventually realized they couldn't get one, because a lot of MFA programs are like about writing literary fiction, right? Whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can imagine is that scene with Liz and the pipe, and like workshopping that in class. Like, could you imagine how traumatic that'd be? That it'd be like, actually, I think you should have more, right? Or like, I just can't imagine what that
somebody
would have
raises
looked
the
like.
hand, like,
Yeah.
what if you added a mouse?
Yeah. Like, that's what I picture in my head, in Columbia, like, this in the prestigious halls. And like, I just can't get that image out of my head, and it tickles my fancy, because I feel like it would have been hard for her to find this voice in a program where a lot of other people are not going to be writing anything like this, right?
That's interesting. She's a pretty new author, so she doesn't have a ton of interviews out to kind of look in. So she doesn't. I haven't, from what I had read, to my knowledge, she hasn't talked about her kind of educational experience at all. So
certainly in her credits, not credits, in her thank yous, she does say thank you to a lot of her faculty.
Yeah, I was about,
which makes me think that it was probably one of the only non-toxic MFA programs I've ever heard of. Because again, most everyone I know who's gotten an MFA has talked about how traumatizing that community was.
I was about to say,
but it's just interesting.
On page 2, the only thing I could find was on page 276 of the acknowledgement. She literally shouts out the wonderful professors at Columbia and NYU. So to my knowledge, it seems like it must have been a fairly good program to go through individually.
It just cracks me up to imagine, like you said, someone raising their hand and they're like, I have an idea. And then like just workshopping that for a good hour.
Absolutely. It probably doesn't surprise you that Leede is she can be found in LA. That's her stomping ground at the moment. She lives there. She's got 4 rescue dogs, which she talks about in a couple of her interviews. She says very much inspire her work. Keep her going. And along with this book, she's got 2 more horror novels. Along with Maeve Fly, CJ also has 3 more horror books coming out from Nightfire, which is a publisher. She talked about that in an interview that she did with Paul Seelman. It was a really fascinating, another really good interview. We'll also throw that in the link here from June 6th, 2023.
You were going to talk something about Nightfire.
Right. And she's already turned in 1 book to her editor. She turned it in last October of 2023, and she's working on 2 more books simultaneously at the moment. So no rest for the weary.
I want to shift and talk, because your comment about how she has rescue dogs made me think of Lester the cat, and the fact that, one of the boundaries that doesn't get crossed is any harm to animals. But that doesn't mean that boundaries aren't crossed. And one of the premises at the very beginning of the book is that Maeve sort of goes on this rant, and how much of this is Maeve and how much of this is Leede, is open to interpretation. But about this idea that, like, it seems like we can't help but make sure that women, if they are going to be cast in villainous roles, that they either have a tragic backstory or they're going to have some sort of redemption arc. Often in like Victorian novels, they would just like literally die of like just guilt. So they would like save the day, and then they would like just lay down and be like, I'm sorry that I was promiscuous, and then just die. And so, this is like not a new thing. And of course she's referencing this strong literary tradition, which is one of the reasons that Maeve is so attracted to Elsa, because she feels like this is the closest to this sort of liminal villainous princess character that we have today. But there are still lines, right, that Maeve crosses that are ones I didn't need to have seen be crossed. And I feel conflicted, because I had no problems with any of the murder. I don't know what that says about me. I had no problems with any of the gore except for the scene with Liz.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's not just because I got to imagine some things I hadn't imagined before, but I think it's also because there's a part of me that feels like that's the one thing. This is so weird, but that's the one thing a woman shouldn't do to another woman, right? It's because every woman has the potential and is often the victim of some sort of either sexual abuse or sexual assault. That's like the one line you don't cross. Like, it's okay to kill another woman. You just don't do that. And that's silly, right? That's probably why Leede made us go to those places. But I struggled as a result with how to feel about Maeve, because that was the line that up until that point I was here for all of it, whatever that says about me.
No, I would not be shocked if that's a super common. I had a very similar reaction. I had to put the book down. Like I told you, I was on the plane. I like literally had to put the book down and stop for a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's horrifying for every reason that we're talking about here. It's like utterly repulsive that a human being would do this. And Leede talked about it that in her conversation with Ariana Reich. She was like, I think one of the things I wanted to tap into, the things that really scared me, was harming another person. That is what scares me, is like it's like the ability of a human to do that. And she's like, so I wanted to go there. She's like, that's what scared me. And I think, as uncomfortable as it was, I think it's incredibly effective. I mean, also should be acknowledged that it's incredibly gruesome and super effed up. Like, I am not going to be able to think of Mickey Mouse ears the same way and any of that. It's going to be a while. It's going to be a while. So thank you for that. Again, as I think I said earlier, but I'm in the best way, I think. Because I don't think, again, maybe some people are going to be like, no, just too far. Like, because part of me was another thing I saw in conversation, as when people talk about this in conversation, she's talked about it herself, is like allowing women to do the killing, in this sense, doing the same thing and not creating, like you were saying, not creating an empathetic kind of reason and rationale behind it. And I guess there's, I mean, maybe this is just naive of me. Maybe it's just like, that's just not how things work. Don't ask for that purity in novels. That's what horror books are for, to explore these dark things of that.
That's true.
But it's pretty
That's
effed
true.
up. So
There's a line in there when Maeve is I believe it's when she's killing the band that is using her grandmother's image on the cover.
yeah,
And she says that the one band, it's either him or it's Daniel or David, whoever Kate's with. It's one of the two. But it is a man. It is one of the men that she kills. And he says, he keeps saying, "Why me?" And she has this line where she says that's not something a woman ever asks, because a woman understands that that's always something that can happen. But there's a privilege for many men where that's not even something that they consider, and I think we've all been in part of conversations where men and women have very, very different ways of just like going outside, right?
mm-hmm.
And like the amount of awareness that a big burly man has about his surroundings and a woman does, and the tensions that happen when people try to express like, well, why don't you just walk outside and go for a run? And it's like, because I don't want to die.
Yeah.
So I think it was really interesting in that way, because I do wonder, I don't think I would have had the same level of repulsion. Certainly I would have to the event itself and the description, but like I think part of what offended me is that it was a woman doing it to another woman. And that again is part of Lee's point, right? Of is that fair, right? Is the fact that Maeve is very sexual, that she enjoys a lot of intriguing sexual things, but mainly consensual,
Yeah.
right? Like, is it, like, she is being crafted in a certain way that we just wouldn't cast that same level of judgment to if this was, Marty Fly or something like that.
Yeah, and it is, I guess, ultimately, interesting in that regard, because it is, I guess, ultimately you could argue that her boss does the ultimate other evil thing too, in taking down another woman for
Yes,
her sexuality. You're like, so I
exactly.
guess it's kind
Yes.
of like this, it's a really bad situation that has been created all around, because Liz definitely is somewhere she's not supposed to be, and does then
Yes.
without consent take video, that's actually really, that is pornography. It's just,
It is.
so I guess, I mean, I don't know, one way
And
to
there's a
treat.
hint that this
Yeah,
is,
go ahead.
yeah, and there's a hint that this isn't Liz's first sort of foray into pornography, right? Because there's some incriminating photos. And I think you're absolutely correct. In fact, what I liked about Maeve's initial sort of thoughts about Liz is she said, like, I hate Liz. In fact, she said, if ever there was a more deplorable person than Liz, I don't know who it is, and she's my nemesis. And then there's a line about how much she loves rules and all that stuff. But she also says, but I'm glad to have a nemesis, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's exciting to have this like thing in my life. And it really is, you're right, when Liz crosses a line, when she violates Maeve, because Maeve says our work performance is not the issue, right? We're actually excellent at our job. So you're right. It's just a less, it will haunt you in your dreams sort of assault, but it is nevertheless an assault that is tied to a sexual aspect.
And what's interesting, for like all Maeve's talk of like how immoral she is and everything, I don't know, I don't believe her when she says to Liz, I would have done this anyway. I don't believe that. I actually do
Yeah,
not believe her when she says that, because every other
that's
killing that she
interesting.
has been happened, or all of her other situations, have been motivated by some, you can argue it's like a totally irrational, it's like meaningless created sense of justice, but isn't that all justice that she picks? But there's always some like reason that she has done it. It's like her grandmother, they're abusing her grandmother's image. They're racist. They're kind of abusing women. It's these kind of things. So I don't know if I believe Maeve that she would have snapped to this point without this other underlying thing. She thinks she's a wolf. She talks there. And the one time that she does actually snap on Gideon at the end, she regrets it. And I'm unsure if she will ever. Maybe she will do it again. Maybe now the wolf has fully been unleashed. That's the point of the book. I guess you can interpret it that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel super conflicted at the end, because I feel she is like that character from the myth. She has, unfortunately, with the devil, unfortunately, she's damned herself. Now, to damn herself to be powerless and like a killer who's just going to keep killing, or damned herself to be weak and alone and sad forever and going to jail eventually, maybe for these murders.
Yeah.
Who's to say? We don't get the luxury of that information.
And although we don't receive that super tragic backstory, we are very much given the impression that she believes she deserves to be damned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes she accepts that mantle with pride. I'm just like my grandmother, I deserve this. And sometimes she accepts it as her punishment, right? Like, I will never be Kate. I will never be anything other than who I am. This is therefore my punishment. And I think I think you're very much correct. I also read it that way, that I'm not sure she would have certainly done the things she did to the level she did, right? She is punishing Liz because Liz hurt her. And Liz violated the sanctity of their relationship,
Yeah.
right? Which was work nemesis, not, like, terrible person.
And
I think that's
I
important.
think it also definitely it comes at a really bad time, obviously. Everything is going
Yes.
bad in her personal life. She has kind of ruined all of her other relationships, and she's kind
Yes.
of feeling betrayed there. And then she just it's her ultimate fear is that people are going to succeed and leave her and do better. And then I can't imagine it hurts really deeply to see that, and she says this, Liz gets what she wants, is in a happy
Hmm.
relationship, and then still comes back to take her down. And I can see that maybe she sees this happening with Kate. With Kate's getting better, she's going to leave
Hmm.
her. She's worried about what's going to happen there. She sees this with Gideon. Maybe he doesn't need her anymore. Go on to some other supermodel or something. Get back at her. She's living, and maybe this is paranoia. Maybe it's not, but it is certainly it creates a really toxic situation.
Well, and that whole subplot where she thinks that she sees someone that looks just like her leaving the dolls, right? And then of course at the end we realize that at least some of that was her, somewhere between paranoia and just sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Because of course we see that Gideon has kind of been leaving them as love offerings to her.
Hmm.
And so we do get the impression that, like, this has just been it's just been a really bad couple of weeks.
For sure.
And that's not an excuse. And I don't think Lead even tries to make that be an excuse, but you're absolutely correct that we are asked to consider. I'm not always keen on of that phrase of, an injured animal will bite, or I can't even remember how it goes, but like, don't back a animal in the corner and not be surprised if it bites you, or whatever that phrase is that I just slaughtered. But there is some truth, right? If we're going to use that metaphor of the wolf, in fact, she talks about it.
Yeah.
She talks about with the tar pits, right? That that there will come a point where you just are so wounded or so hungry that you're willing to do things that are ruinous, right? And of course the wolves are attacking the mammoths in the tar pit. And this is her right moment of she's so hungry for affection, for love, for acknowledgement, to not feel like she has to be damned, that I don't know. I agree. I don't think she would have done it otherwise. Certainly not the intensity of what she did. So I want to shift to the ending. We've kind of alluded that it doesn't have a happy ending, which is actually the part I was saddest about. And I think it's why it probably shouldn't have had a happy ending. And Lead told us from the beginning, right, that there are no spoilers. It always ends badly.
Yeah.
And that Maeve is destined to be alone. We even have that huge jack-o'-lantern myth, right, that lets us know that this is not going to end well. But gosh darn it, I wanted those kids to. It was too much the Gift of the Magi, which is like my least favorite story ever, right? And I really I hate that story because all he had to do is be like, hey, I too kill people, not like, hey, let's go upstairs, I have something to show you. Should have just been like, I have pictures too of death and murder. And it just drove me crazy, but it was the right ending. I just wanted them to decorate for Halloween together
and kill people. Yeah,
and kill people.
I think it's a much more cozy, and I guess I don't know. I feel like perhaps after everything she's done, I just can't. I don't know. It kind of feels fitting. You're like, and maybe that's my own terrible warped sense of justice as being like, yeah, whatever. I guess that makes sense. It's only natural payoff, that kind of that. But I
Yeah,
see I
for
hear the
me,
tension.
yeah, I think it is what you said though about this issue of a form of retribution and justice, that
Yeah.
I want to believe that it is possible to not have a point of no return, right? Both the story of the jack-o'-lantern and Maeve's story have this idea that there can be a tipping point at which point you are doomed to only experience the ramifications of your actions. And I guess I just want to believe that we can always have a better life if we But that's not life, right? That's
I
not
guess
how life
it's
works.
not
So
life.
I guess it doesn't,
And I
yeah.
guess it's not, hearing from, reading some of her influences, it kind of makes sense. Some of the, like, she's references Rocky Horror, which ends on everything being
Yeah,
destroyed, and like, it's a
it's
campy
true.
madness and wild ride to get there, but then everything ultimately goes away and is destroyed and taken at the end.
Yeah.
She talks about Story of the Eye, American Psycho, as we've referenced a bunch, Notes from the Underground, Fight Club, Final Girl Support Group, My Heart is a Chainsaw.
Well, when you cite that list, I mean, yeah, none of them end happily, and all of them, particularly, I think My Heart is a Chainsaw, Final Support Group, and Rocky Horror, because it is itself a subversive text, really are looking at the trauma of horror,
For
right,
sure.
and the lingering consequences, that it's not necessarily the blood and gore that is itself in the moment what haunts us, right? It's the ways in which we can't escape the tar pit after the fact. And I think that's, in that respect, it is the only ending we could have gotten. But I just can't stand that gift of the magi sort of approach of like all it would have, Romeo and Juliet, right?
Yeah.
Like that, just like it would have just taken a simple conversation and this all could have been avoided.
Why is it good enough for Shakespeare, but it's not good enough for CJ?
I don't think it was good enough for Shakespeare. There's a reason that Romeo and Juliet should never be ever shown again. So that's, and same with like Gift of the Magi. No one should ever read that story again. Just don't. Just tell people what you're buying them.
Read Maeve
Tell
Fly.
people you're a murderer.
Read Maeve Fly
Yeah.
instead. When you're thinking about reading
Yes.
The Gift of the Magi at Christmas to your kids, read
Yes.
them the Maeve
Yes.
Fly.
Yeah. You started reading next to a baby. The next logical step is to just read it aloud to the baby. So that works for me.
We might be seeing more of this, of Maeve Fly on the big screen, and asked in an interview about potential film prospects. She said, and I quote here, "I definitely hope to see Maeve on the screen." So no confirmation of any plans. Again, if you are listening, you're welcome to come on the pod and correct that record. But to this day, this film's or television plans are still speculative. So maybe some more of Maeve, definitely more from this author. So I'm definitely excited to check it out.
And I think that like it's really important to acknowledge the magic and trauma that is coming to us in the genre through women, queer, and POC writers. Unfortunately, that's rarely the stuff I get to teach in my classes for lots of reasons. But that's, if you want to be traumatized, right? Like it's not Stephen King. It's these folks who are digging deep. So it would be really exciting to see an adaptation of that. But in the meantime, we will have to return to a long-established franchise that we are very close to being done with.
Yeah.
Toni, what is our next episode going to be on?
Yeah, the definitely more testosterone-filled franchise. We're returning to Friday the 13th. We are getting to the end of our exploration.
Yay.
And as a reward, we get to go to hell. We're going to be talking about 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. So if you haven't seen that one, like I have not seen that one, check it out in the meantime. If you have not read Maeve Fly by C.J. Leede, do yourself a favor, pick it up. Don't read it around your kids. All that's the section about reading it to children was a joke. Do not read it to your kids.
No.
But you should
Never.
read it. It's pretty interesting.
Yes. And we want to thank Jackson O'Brien, who always makes us sound way smarter than we are. Thank you so much for editing the podcast and making the magic happen. And to those of you that listen to us talk about all of our feelings and work through our thoughts about horror, thank you so much for listening to our nightmares.
And have a spooktacular day.